The sun cast long shadows across the courthouse steps as Rachel Morgan clutched her infant daughter, Lily, to her chest. Her free hand was a lifeline, wrapped tightly around the small fingers of 3-year-old Mia. A warm summer breeze carried the scent of freshly cut grass and new beginnings, but Rachel's stomach churned with anxiety. 3 months ago, she had been Rachel Williams, a chemistry teacher with a comfortable house in the suburbs. Now, she was just another broke divorcee with 2 small daughters who depended on her for everything. Mia tugged on Rachel's frayed dress, her brown eyes wide with a mixture of boredom and exhaustion. The child had been remarkably patient through the first hour of the county property auction. But her tolerance was wearing thin. Lily, at only 8 months old, slept nestled against Rachel's shoulder, blissfully unaware of their precarious circumstances. The auctioneer's voice boomed across the courthouse lawn, announcing the first property, a 3-bedroom home with a tax lien. Rachel watched as the bids quickly soared past anything she could possibly afford. Her entire net worth was in her wallet, $73 and change. It might as well have been 73 cents for all the good it could do her here. Rachel's mind flashed back to that final, explosive confrontation with Daniel, just 3 months before. His face had twisted into a mask of rage as he loomed over her, while she held a wailing baby Lily. Mia had clung to Rachel's legs, trembling. The sting of Daniel's words was still fresh. "You never supported my vision, always questioning, always worrying about money. My business would have been a success if you had just believed in me." What he'd failed to mention were the mountains of debt he'd hidden. The second mortgage he'd taken out without her knowledge. The credit cards maxed out to fund his latest doomed venture. The foreclosure notice had been the final blow, shattering the last semblance of stability they had. One by one, the properties were sold to investors and locals with real money. Rachel stayed, though she couldn't have explained why. Maybe it was simple desperation. They had nowhere to go after the motel money ran out next week. Or maybe it was a stubborn resolve that had seen her through the divorce, a refusal to accept that there was no path forward. The auctioneer's voice cut through her thoughts. "Next up, item 14. Mountain cabin on 5 acres, Taylor Ridge. Dilapidated outbuilding, no utilities. We'll open the bidding at $500. A silence fell over the crowd. Even the bargain hunters seemed uninterested in a rundown shack miles from anywhere. 200. The auctioneer's voice dropped, searching for any interest. 100. Still no takers. 50, anyone? A sudden, inexplicable certainty seized Rachel. Without planning to speak, she called out, "I'll give you 50 cents. A ripple of laughter went through the crowd. A man in an expensive suit smirked, whispering something to his companion that made them both chuckle. The auctioneer squinted in her direction, trying to gauge if she was serious. 50 cents, ma'am. This is a legal auction, not a vaudeville show." Rachel squared her shoulders, ignoring the heat rising in her neck. "I have 50 cents, and there are no other bidders. The county wants this property off the tax roll, doesn't it?" More chuckles, but the auctioneer conferred briefly with a county clerk. Rachel held her breath. This was madness. A cabin with no power, no running water, miles from civilization. But it was a roof, it was something they could own outright, something no one could take from them. The auctioneer cleared his throat. "Sold. To the lady for 50 cents. Please see the clerk to process the paperwork." The wealthy man who had been laughing earlier approached as Rachel fumbled in her purse for 2 quarters. His tailored suit probably cost more than she used to make in a month of teaching. The gold watch on his wrist glinted in the afternoon sun. You do realize you just bought a worthless pile of rotten lumber, right? That place hasn't been lived in since Old Man Carter disappeared decades ago. You'd be better off sleeping in your car. Rachel met his gaze squarely. Sometimes, the bravest thing you can do is bet everything on nothing. The man's name tag read, Edward Prescott, Heritage Mining Corp. He just shook his head, turning away with a dismissive wave. Rachel turned to find Mia watching her, wide-eyed. Are we really going to live in a cabin in the mountains, Mommy? Rachel stuffed the deed into her pocket, wondering if she'd just made the biggest mistake of her life, or somehow found their salvation. We're going to try. The drive to Taylor Ridge took nearly 2 hours, the last 40 minutes on a rutted dirt road that threatened to tear the suspension out of their old Honda Civic. With every mile, civilization receded. First the suburbs, then the small towns, then even the scattered farmhouses, until there was nothing but dense forest and the occasional dirt track branching off the main road. Rachel gripped the steering wheel, ignoring the warning sirens blaring in her rational mind. This was insane. She had brought her children into the middle of nowhere, with no plan beyond a desperate 50-cent gamble on shelter. Her ex-husband would have a field day with this. More proof of the impulsive decision-making he'd cited during the custody hearings. The GPS had lost its signal 20 minutes ago. Now they were navigating by the crude map the county clerk had sketched on the back of the deed. Turn left at the lightning-struck pine, it read. Rachel spotted the gnarled, blackened tree and eased the car onto an even narrower track. Mia pressed her face against the window, uncharacteristically quiet. Lily had woken up and was beginning to fuss in her car seat, hungry and uncomfortable from the long drive. Are we there yet? Mia asked for the 10th time, her small voice tinged with weariness. Almost, sweetie. Just a little further. The motel had been bad enough, with its paper-thin walls broadcasting the arguments from neighboring rooms and the constant, gnawing worry over their dwindling funds. But at least it had electricity, running water, a connection to the world they knew. This felt like driving off the edge of the map. The road curved sharply around a massive boulder, and then, suddenly, their new home came into view through the trees. Rachel's heart sank. Cabin was a generous description for the structure before them. It was a small, one-story building with a sagging roof and boarded-up windows. The porch tilted precariously to one side, its rotten steps leading to a door secured with a rusty padlock. Home sweet home, Rachel murmured, forcing a note of optimism into her voice. It needs some work, but it's ours. No rent, no mortgage, just a place to catch our breath and figure out what's next. She parked the car, and they approached cautiously, stepping over fallen branches and knee-high weeds. Rachel tried the padlock and found it frozen solid despite the rust. The key from the county clerk, an old iron thing that looked like it belonged in a history museum, fit surprisingly well. The lock groaned open with a reluctant shriek. The smell hit them first. Stale, musty air, heavy with decades of neglect. Rachel pushed the door further open, letting a shaft of late-afternoon sun pierce the dark interior. Dust motes danced in the beam, illuminating a space that was surprisingly intact. The main room served as both living area and kitchen, with a stone fireplace dominating one wall. A doorway led to what looked like a back bedroom, and a narrow ladder suggested a loft of some kind above. Rachel stepped inside, testing the floorboards. They creaked, but held firm. The roof had leaked in several places, evident from the water stains on the wood ceiling, but the structure itself seemed solid. Hand-hewn beams supported the roof, their joinery revealing the skilled craftsmanship of another era. Mia sneezed as she stepped inside, stirring up a cloud of dust. Her face scrunched in confusion. "It's dirty and dark. Where are the lights?" "There's no electricity, honey. No running water either," Rachel explained gently, kneeling to meet her daughter's eyes. "It's like camping, remember? We'll use lanterns and flashlights. But how will we watch cartoons? Or take a bath?" Mia's lower lip trembled. "We'll adapt, sweetie. People lived without modern conveniences for thousands of years." Rachel smoothed her daughter's hair, trying to project a confidence she didn't feel. "I know about chemical purification from my work as a teacher, and there has to be a water source nearby. No one builds a cabin without access to water." She moved to the boarded-up windows, prying her fingers under the edge of one plank. The wood gave way, rotted through from years of exposure. Sunlight flooded the room, revealing details hidden in the gloom. A wood-burning stove in the kitchen area, shelves built into the walls, a handmade table leaning in a corner. Most importantly, she could now see that while neglected, the cabin wasn't a ruin. The bones were good. The damage was mostly cosmetic. "We'll need to patch the roof before anything else," Rachel said, mentally cataloging the tasks ahead, the impossibility of their situation temporarily overridden by practical considerations. "Get the chimney inspected to make sure we can use the fireplace safely. Find the water source and test it." Mia, her initial skepticism giving way to cautious exploration, wandered toward the back room. Lily had quieted in Rachel's arms, her wide eyes taking in the strange new surroundings. "Mommy, come look at this." The bedroom was smaller than the main area, with built-in shelves along one wall and a window facing east toward the ridge. Like the front room, it showed signs of neglect, but not destruction. Mia was examining the windowsill, her finger tracing something carved into the wood. 1967, she read carefully, sounding out the letters and numbers Rachel had taught her. "What's that mean?" Rachel ran her hand over the carefully carved numerals. "I think it means someone made this place their home once, and we can do it again." They spent the rest of the day taking inventory of their new home and its surroundings. The property included about 5 acres of wooded land, which sloped down toward a creek about 200 yards behind the cabin. The water ran clear and cold, though Rachel collected samples in empty water bottles to test later. A dilapidated outhouse stood a discreet distance from the cabin. Its structure was questionable, but it was potentially salvageable. Inside, they swept decades of dust and debris from the floors, revealing solid hardwood underneath. They pried the remaining boards from the windows, allowing a cross breeze to clear the stuffy air. The furniture was sparse but serviceable. The table and 2 chairs, a metal bed frame without a mattress in the bedroom, and built-in shelves and hooks for storage. As the sun began to set, they spread their sleeping bags on the newly swept floor of the main room. Their car held everything they still owned: clothes, a camp stove, a few basic tools, and the handful of personal items they'd managed to keep through the financial collapse of their former life. Tomorrow, they would bring it all inside, but tonight, they were too exhausted from the day's discoveries. Rachel's training as a chemistry teacher was already proving invaluable, helping her assess their most critical needs: water, shelter, heat, food. The hierarchy hadn't changed since prehistoric times. The creek provided water, though she needed to verify its purity. The cabin offered shelter, though it needed significant repairs. Heat would come from the fireplace and wood stove, assuming both could be made operational. Food remained the most pressing concern. their limited funds demanding careful rationing. Lying in her sleeping bag as darkness enveloped the cabin, Rachel pulled out her old leather-bound journal, a birthday gift from Daniel before everything had fallen apart. Its pages now held careful lists and calculations, tracking every expense and mapping out their uncertain future. By the light of a battery-powered lantern, she began a new entry. Day 1 at Taylor Ridge. Cabin is in better shape than expected. Solid foundation, good bones. Roof needs immediate patching. 3 leaks identified. Creek approx. 200 yards south seems clean but requires testing. Outhouse structurally questionable but functional. No signs of wildlife intrusion in cabin. Priorities. 1. Roof repair. 2. Ceiling windows. 3. Fireplace chimney inspection. 4. Water testing. 5. Sustainable food plan. She closed the journal, listening to the unfamiliar sounds of the forest at night. In the city, there had been a constant background hum. Traffic, neighbors, air conditioning, the low thrum of electronics. Here the silence was a living thing, punctuated only by the hoot of an owl, the rustle of leaves in the wind, the distant murmur of the creek. Different, but not necessarily worse. Beside her, the 2 girls' breathing had fallen into the deep, even rhythm of sleep. Despite everything, they seemed to accept each new challenge with a startling ease. Their resilience was both heart-wrenching and inspiring. Children shouldn't have to be this adaptable, this understanding of adult failings and limitations. And yet, here they were, sleeping soundly in a derelict cabin, all because their mother had gambled their last 50 cents on a desperate hope. Rachel's scientific mind never stopped calculating probabilities, and she knew the odds were stacked against them. But for the first time since the divorce, they had something that was truly theirs. Not borrowed, not rented, not at the mercy of someone else's decisions. That had to be worth something. Morning light streamed through the curtainless windows, casting geometric patterns across the wooden floorboards. Rachel woke with the sun, a habit forged in the last difficult months, when every hour was a battle in the fight to rebuild their lives. Lily was already awake beside her, cooing softly and reaching for her mother's face with chubby fingers. Mia was still asleep, curled in her sleeping bag, dark hair falling across her forehead. Rachel let Mia have her peace, knowing the day ahead would demand much from them both. She scooped Lily into her arms and moved quietly to the porch, where the crisp morning air was a balm to her cluttered mind. Standing on the porch, which felt more stable than it had looked the day before, Rachel surveyed their property. The forest pressed in on 3 sides, mostly pine and oak, the undergrowth creating natural boundaries. To the east, the land opened slightly, offering a view down the valley to distant ridges shrouded in a blue haze. Lily babbled happily in her arms, seemingly unbothered by the new surroundings. At 8 months, her world was simply wherever her mother and sister were. Rachel envied that simplicity. She made her way towards the creek, listening as the forest woke around her. Birds chirped in the canopy. Unseen creatures rustled in the undergrowth, and the steady music of running water grew louder as she approached. The stream was perhaps 8 feet across, tumbling over smooth stones with occasional deeper pools. Rachel knelt beside one of these pools, dipping her hand into the cold, clear water. Her chemistry background would be useful here. Testing for contaminants, understanding how to purify the water for drinking, recognizing potential dangers. Returning to the cabin, she found Mia awake. examining the stone fireplace with curious hands. The hearth was solid, built of carefully fitted river rock without mortar. The chimney looked intact, but Rachel made a mental note to check for cracks or blockages before she dared light a fire. "I'm hungry," Mia announced, rubbing the sleep from her eyes. "Let's set up the camp stove on the porch and make some breakfast," Rachel suggested. "Then we can explore a little more." Together, in the revealing light of morning, they explored the cabin in more detail. The main room's dimensions became clearer, roughly 20 by 20 feet, with the kitchen area defined by the wood stove and a dry sink along the north wall. The back room was about half that size, with built-in shelves and a window whose sill bore a set of carved initials. The ladder they'd noticed yesterday led to a small loft under the peak of the roof, large enough for storage or perhaps a sleeping area for Mia, once they checked its structural integrity. As they moved a heavy cabinet for better access to one of the windows, Mia's beloved stuffed rabbit fell behind it. When Rachel helped her retrieve it, they discovered a folded piece of paper that had been wedged behind the furniture. The yellowed sheet held a single line of faded script. "The treasure is not beneath the earth, but within it." "What does that mean?" Mia asked, her eyes wide with sudden excitement. "Is there a treasure here? Like pirate gold?" Rachel studied the cryptic message, turning it over to kitchen the rest of the page blank. It could be nothing, just someone's philosophical musings, or maybe something to do with mining. These mountains had a history of silver mining. She tucked the paper into her journal, filing the mystery away for later. Her immediate concerns were far more practical than riddles left by previous occupants. They spent the morning hauling their belongings from the car and setting up the camp stove on the porch for a simple breakfast. Rachel had carefully packed what food remained: oatmeal, dried fruit, canned beans, rice, pasta, powdered milk. Enough to last 2 weeks, if they were careful, by which time she would need a plan for resupply. After they ate, they began the most urgent task: assessing the damage to the roof. From inside, they'd identified 3 distinct leaks, but the full extent of the problem required an external inspection. Lacking a ladder tall enough, Rachel carefully climbed onto the hood of the car and used the porch roof as a stepping stone to reach the main roof. "Stay right there where I can see you," she instructed Mia, who sat on a blanket with Lily beside her in a portable playpen they'd brought from their old life. The wooden shingles were in worse shape than she had feared. Many were rotten through, crumbling to the touch. Others were loose, ready to be carried away by the next rain. Rachel moved slowly across the pitched surface, testing each section carefully before putting her weight on it. "Mama?" Mia asked, her voice small and uncertain. "Are we really going to be okay here?" Rachel paused, considering her answer carefully. The odds were against them, but she refused to burden her daughter with the full weight of adult worries. "It will be hard, but yes, it can work. People have lived in places like this for centuries. We're just rediscovering old skills." From the roof, she could see farther, across their property and into the surrounding wilderness. No other cabins were visible, though a wisp of smoke from a distant chimney suggested they weren't entirely alone in these mountains. The isolation was both a blessing and a curse. No prying eyes to judge their unconventional choices, but also no immediate help in an emergency. As she moved to examine another section of damaged shingles, Rachel felt the roof give way beneath her feet. Rotten wood splintered and she was suddenly sliding, scrambling for purchase on the slick surface. Her fingers clawed at the edge of a more solid section, but her legs dangled over the side, kicking uselessly at the air. Mia screamed below, and Lily, startled by her sister's cry, began to wail in chorus. The sound of her children's terror gave Rachel a surge of desperate strength. She hauled herself up, but another section of roof crumbled under her hand. Left with no choice, she pushed away from the roof and dropped the 8 feet to the ground, landing awkwardly with a sharp, searing pain in her ankle. She lay there for a moment, stunned by the fall and the pain. Then Mia was beside her, small hands on her face, tears streaming. "Mama? Mama, are you dead?" Rachel forced herself to sit up, wincing at the throbbing in her ankle. "I'm okay, sweetie. Just a little hurt. Help me get to Lily, please." Leaning on her daughter's small shoulder, she hobbled to the playpen where Lily continued to cry. Rachel scooped up the baby, holding both her children tightly as her heart rate gradually returned to normal. The reality of their situation hit her with brutal clarity. If something happened to her out here, her daughters would be alone, helpless, with no one to even know they were in trouble. "We have to be more careful," she whispered, as much to herself as to Mia. "No more climbing on the roof without the proper equipment." By evening, Rachel had her ankle tightly wrapped, thankfully sprained, not broken, and had rigged a temporary patch for the roof using a tarp from the car, weighted down with rocks. It wouldn't hold in a serious storm, but it would buy them time. Inside, while checking the floor where the girls would sleep, Rachel noticed an uneven board that moved slightly under pressure. Curious, she worked her fingers under the edge and lifted. The plank came away easily, revealing a small crawl space where previous occupants might have hidden valuables. It was empty now, but the discovery gave Rachel an idea for stashing Carter's mysterious note and any other significant finds away from prying eyes. As night fell, Rachel sat at the crude table, writing in her journal by lantern light, planning a trip to the nearest town the next day to find materials to repair the roof. Mia had turned an empty cardboard box into a house for her stuffed animals. Her resilience, once again, amazed her mother. "Mama, who do you think lived here before?" Mia asked, as Rachel tucked her into her sleeping bag later. "I'm not sure. Someone named WC, according to those initials we found. We'll have to be detectives and find out." "Like Scooby-Doo?" Mia's eyes lit up. "Exactly like that," Rachel said. "We'll look for clues. But first, we need to make our house safe and cozy. Then, we can solve mysteries." After both girls were asleep, Rachel returned to her journal. She added a final entry. "Our needs are basic but urgent. Money is almost gone. I need to find work in town, whatever it takes. I have a strange feeling about this place, as if we were meant to find it, or it was meant to find us." The note about the treasure. A meaningless scrawl or something more? Who was WC? And why did they abandon this place? She slept poorly that night, her dreams filled with falling and being chased, and the unnerving sensation of being watched. Once she woke with a start, certain she'd heard footsteps on the porch. But when she listened, there was only the whisper of the wind in the trees and the soft breathing of her daughters beside her. The journey to Pineville the next day was both an ordeal and a revelation. The small town, a former mining community turned tourist stop, was the closest settlement, about 22 miles from their cabin. Rachel's ankle ached with every press of the pedal, and managing 2 young children while limping through stores drew curious looks from the locals. The hardware store owner, a weathered man named Jim Cooper, raised his eyebrows when Rachel mentioned Taylor Ridge. "You're staying up at Old Man Carter's place? That cabin's been empty since the early 70s. Most folks figured it would have fallen in on itself by now." Rachel bought roofing materials and basic supplies, stretching her limited funds as far as they would go. "Do you know anything about a Carter?" she asked. The initials WC are carved into one of the windowsills dated 1967. Jim leaned against the counter, a thoughtful look clouding his features. "William Carter, geologist or a mining engineer, something like that. Showed up here in the mid-60s. Kept to himself mostly. By all accounts, a smart fella, but odd. Spent all his time up in the mountains making maps and collecting samples. Then one day, he just vanished. What happened to him? Some say he struck it rich and moved on. Others think he ran afoul of the mining companies that wanted his research. Most likely story is he just died out there alone." The librarian offered more concrete information when Rachel inquired later that day. The local history section had several references to William Carter, including a 1965 newspaper article announcing his purchase of the Taylor Ridge property, described as formerly belonging to the defunct Taylor Mining Company. A photograph accompanied the article. A thin, serious man with intelligent eyes and premature gray at his temples. The caption identified him as William Carter, formerly of Denver, Colorado, now a resident of Pineville. Rachel made photocopies of the relevant articles, adding them to her growing file on the cabin's previous occupant. The mystery of William Carter provided a welcome distraction from their immediate challenges, a puzzle to solve between the endless tasks of making their shelter habitable. The weeks that followed fell into a rhythm of grueling physical labor and small, hard-won victories. Rachel replaced damaged shingles, sealed windows with plastic sheeting, cleared the brush from around the cabin, and established a reliable system for collecting and purifying water from the creek. Each day brought new challenges and small triumphs, their bodies growing stronger as they adapted to mountain life. Rachel began homeschooling Mia, using their surroundings as a living classroom. Botany lessons involved identifying edible plants in the forest. Physics came alive through the mechanical advantage of levers and pulleys used in their repair work. Chemistry found practical application in purifying water and understanding the properties of the materials they salvaged. Juggling the demands of a baby, a 3-year-old, and a dilapidated cabin stretched Rachel to her breaking point. She often worked with Lily strapped to her chest, the infant alternating between sleep and observing the world with wide, curious eyes. Mia, meanwhile, had become her small shadow, a tiny assistant who fetched tools and held things steady with determined little hands. The girl's vocabulary expanded daily, suddenly filled with words like shingle, rafter, and mortar. Under their combined efforts, the cabin was slowly transforming. The roof no longer wept with every rain. The new window panes let in the light, but kept out the drafts, and the stone fireplace, having passed Rachel's meticulous inspection, now radiated a steady, welcome warmth. As autumn painted the mountainsides and the air grew crisp, they began to scavenge, venturing deeper into the woods to reclaim materials from abandoned structures. An old hunting camp yielded a usable mattress for their bed frame, while a collapsed shed provided sound lumber for repairs. Every night, Rachel documented their progress in her journal, its pages filled with practical observations, expenses tracked to the penny, and notes on a man named William Carter, pieced together from visits to town and artifacts found within the cabin itself. His mining journals proved especially fascinating, filled with detailed observations of geological formations throughout the region, with a particular focus on silver deposits. Then, on a chilly October morning, as Rachel worked to brace the warped porch, with Mia diligently sorting nails by size and Lily napping inside, the rattle of an old pickup truck echoed up the dirt track. It was their first visitor, A woman with silver hair stepped out, her expression curious. "I'm Margaret Taylor," she said. "My family owned this mountain before the mining company bought it up in the 30s. I heard in town someone was living up here again." Rachel introduced herself and the girls, acutely aware of her worn jeans and calloused hands. Margaret's gaze swept over the cabin, taking in the solid repairs, the neatly stacked firewood, and the small vegetable patch they had started with seeds from the hardware store. "You've done more with this place in a month than anyone expected," she said, her voice warm. "Most folks figured you'd give up after the first hard rain." Margaret became a regular visitor, occasionally bringing treats, fresh eggs from her hens, apples from her orchard, and advice on surviving the harsh mountain winters. More importantly, she brought stories. She had known William Carter. "He was running from something," Margaret explained, though he never said what. "A brilliant man. Knew more about the geology of these mountains than people who'd lived here their whole lives. He was convinced," she said, "that there were untapped silver deposits all over the region. He spent years mapping the land and collecting samples, documenting everything with scientific precision." "Then why didn't he file any mining claims?" Rachel asked one afternoon. They were sitting on the now sturdy porch, watching Mia collect colorful autumn leaves while Lily practiced crawling on a nearby blanket. Margaret shrugged. "He said something once about responsible development versus corporate exploitation. My sense was he had ethical lines he wouldn't cross. He wanted to ensure any silver found would benefit the local communities, not some distant corporation." These conversations added depth to Rachel's understanding of the mysterious WC, whose presence seemed to linger in the cabin. His shelves still held technical books on geology and mining. His handcrafted furniture bore the marks of a careful craftsman. Even the cabin's layout, oriented to capture the maximum sunlight and positioned near the creek but safely above the flood line, spoke of thoughtful planning. As October deepened, Rachel's focus shifted to winter preparations. Margaret's warnings about mountain blizzards lent an urgency to their work. They gathered and split firewood, insulated the cabin walls with scavenged materials, and built a small cold storage cellar to preserve food. Their finances, however, remained precarious. Rachel's small divorce settlement was nearly gone despite her careful rationing. She started taking odd jobs in Pineville, tutoring high school science students, helping at the hardware store during busy weekends, and editing technical documents for a small engineering firm. The work brought in just enough for essentials, with nothing left for luxuries or emergencies. One particularly cold afternoon, Rachel was reinforcing the outhouse before the winter storms hit. Mia was helping, handing her tools, when the girl's stuffed rabbit slipped from her grasp and vanished through a gap in the floorboards. "My bunny!" Mia cried, her small hand reaching into the darkness. Rachel leaned over to retrieve it. Her weight shifted, landing on a rotten plank that gave way with a sickening crack, pitching her forward. For a heart-stopping moment, she dangled over the dark space below before Mia's grip on her shirt helped her scramble back to safety. "Careful, sweetie," Rachel gasped, her heart pounding. "Let me see if I can reach him." Kneeling beside the hole, Rachel aimed her flashlight into the crawl space. There, propped against a foundation pier and half buried in dirt and debris, was a small metal chest. The outhouse had been built directly over it, suggesting it was deliberately concealed. "What is it, Mommy?" Mia asked, peering over her shoulder. "I'm not sure yet. Let me see if I can get it out of there." With careful maneuvering, they managed to pry the chest free. The metal was tarnished, but intact, secured by a padlock that had long since surrendered to rust. A firm twist with a pair of pliers broke the corroded mechanism, and the lid groaned open. Inside, wrapped in oilskin parcels meticulously sealed against the damp, lay a collection of documents, maps, and what looked like ore samples. Rachel's hands trembled slightly as she lifted the first packet, unwrapping the protective covering to reveal papers that were remarkably well preserved. There were mining claims, prepared but never filed, detailed topographical maps with sites marked by symbols and coordinates, letters written in a neat hand, addressed but never sent, and beneath it all, a leather-bound journal with the initials W.C. embossed on the cover. "William Carter," Rachel whispered. Mia's eyes were wide. "Is that W.C.? Did we find the treasure?" she asked, picking up a small leather pouch that had tumbled from the stack. Inside were dozens of rock samples, each labeled with coordinates and dates. Several of them flashed with the distinctive metallic gleam that Rachel, with her chemistry background, recognized instantly. Silver. And from the look of it, high-grade ore. They carried their discovery back to the cabin, spreading the contents across the handmade table. After putting Lily down for her nap, they began to examine the trove. The maps were a work of scientific precision, charting elevations, water sources, and geological formations. Several locations were marked with symbols that, when cross-referenced with Carter's journal, indicated silver deposits of varying richness. The journal itself provided the narrative. William Carter was, as they'd suspected, a mining engineer from Denver. He had walked away from a family mining empire for reasons that were, at first, unclear. He had purchased the Taylor Ridge property specifically for its proximity to geological formations he believed held untapped silver. And, judging by his samples and documentation, he had been right. Rachel turned the pages, mesmerized. In the lamplight, Carter's elegant script told his story, while Mia arranged the glittering rocks into patterns on the floor. His early entries were technical, focused on vein thickness and extraction challenges. But as the journal progressed, his writing grew more philosophical, questioning the ethics of mineral extraction and voicing his concern for the environment. June 15th, 1967. The silver content in today's samples exceeds anything previously documented in this region. Conservative estimates suggest a commercial viability far beyond initial projections. Yet, I am increasingly troubled by what mining operations would do to this landscape. Standard extraction methods would devastate the watershed for decades to come. August 3rd, 1967. I received another letter from Northwest Mining Corporation today. Their offers grow more substantial with each communication. They sense the value of my research, but they understand nothing of its wider implications. To them, these mountains represent only profit margins and shareholder value. October 17th, 1967. I have made my decision. I will not make my findings public. Rather than file the claims, I will complete the documentation and preserve it all for future consideration. Perhaps, in time, extraction technologies will advance to allow for responsible development. Until then, the silver is safer in the ground than on a corporate ledger. The final entries described Carter's methodical concealment of his research, the careful wrapping of the documents, the construction of hiding places across the property, the decision to leave just enough clues for someone truly committed to the land to one day find what he had found. I leave this record for whoever comes next. The silver deposits documented here are real and substantial. They represent a wealth that could transform lives, but only if approached with respect for the land that holds them. May whoever finds these papers understand that true value lies not just in extraction, but in stewardship. Rachel closed the journal, her mind reeling. William Carter had discovered commercially viable silver deposits all around her cabin. He had documented everything needed for legal claims, and then he had deliberately hidden it all. And now, through the sheer chance of a foreclosure auction, a rotten floorboard, and a dropped stuffed rabbit, that information had fallen into her hands. "Does this mean we're rich?" Mia asked, looking up from her arrangement of silver-flecked rocks. Rachel looked at the materials spread across the table, the culmination of a man's life's work, potentially worth millions. Yet the journal also contained a clear warning about the ethical complexities, concerns that resonated with her own environmental conscience. "It means," she said carefully, "that we've found something important, something William Carter thought was worth protecting. We need to understand exactly what we have before we do anything." She opened her own journal, her methodical instincts an anchor in the uncertainty. Found hidden documents from William Carter, W.C. Detailed maps of silver deposits. Prepared unfiled mining claims. Journal expressing ethical concerns. Need to research current mining law and environmental regulations. Need to verify locations and legal status of claims after 50-plus years. That night, long after the girls were asleep, Rachel sat at the table, reading more of Carter's journal by lantern light. His words painted a portrait of a man torn between practical opportunity and ethical principle. It was a conflict she recognized. Financial desperation versus long-term consequences, immediate needs versus future responsibilities. The hidden documents represented a way out of her precarity, perhaps even prosperity, but they also represented a duty to the land, to the community, and to Carter's clearly stated wishes. The path forward was not as simple as filing some forms and cashing a check. She fell asleep at the table, Carter's journal open beside her own, and dreamed of silver veins running through the mountain rock, of water flowing clean over precious metal, of a legacy preserved for half a century before finding its way into desperate but careful hands. The next morning brought a new sense of purpose. After breakfast, Rachel outlined a plan for Mia, her teacher's instinct for structured problem-solving taking over. First, we need to understand modern mining laws. Then, we'll verify a few of Mr. Carter's sites to confirm his documents are accurate. Only then can we make an informed decision. Her next trip to Pineville included a visit to the county courthouse. She began researching current mining regulations and property records. The clerk, initially indifferent to her questions, became more helpful when Rachel mentioned William Carter's name. "Carter, the old hermit up on Taylor Ridge," the clerk mused. "Been speculation about him for decades. Some folks thought he'd struck it rich with silver but refused to file claims on principle. Others just figured he was another eccentric with geologist delusions." A search of public records confirmed it. There were no active mining claims for the areas marked on Carter's maps. If his documentation proved accurate, the deposits he discovered remained legally unclaimed, potentially open to new filings under current law. However, the process of establishing new claims involved substantial registration fees, environmental impact studies, and ongoing maintenance costs, all of which were far beyond Rachel's current financial means. At the library, Rachel found information suggesting silver prices had surged tenfold since Carter's time, making even modest deposits potentially valuable. The economic equations Carter had calculated in the 1960s would need to be completely recalculated based on current market values and extraction costs. Armed with this preliminary information, Rachel, Margaret, and the girls spent the following weekend hiking to the site Carter had marked as his most promising discovery, a location near Willow Creek, about 3 miles from their cabin. The trek proved challenging, with Lily strapped to Rachel's chest and Mia alternating between enthusiastic exploration and complaints of fatigue. But Margaret's steady presence and her knowledge of the terrain made it possible. Following Carter's detailed maps, they found the exact outcrop he had documented, complete with the small cairns he had built to mark the sample sites. The location itself took Rachel's breath away, a natural amphitheater of stone, where water had carved through layers of quartz and granite, exposing veins of mineral deposits clearly visible even to her untrained eyes. Using the descriptions from Carter's journal, they identified the telltale signs of silver ore, collecting small samples that matched those in the leather pouch they had discovered. Mia scrambled over the site with growing excitement, her earlier weariness forgotten, as she gathered shiny rocks under Rachel's watchful eye. "It's all exactly where he said it would be," Margaret marveled, examining a silver-laden quartz vein. "The cairns, the outcrop, everything. Carter really found silver, and a lot of it, based on these veins." Rachel surveyed the site with a more subdued excitement, noting both the apparent richness of the deposits and the untouched nature of the surrounding ecosystem. Carter's ethical concerns became more understandable as she pictured how mining operations would affect the watershed. The creek that supplied their drinking water flowed directly from this area, connecting them intimately to any future development. On the hike back to the cabin, they discussed the implications of their discovery. The silver deposits were real, potentially valuable, and apparently unclaimed, but pursuing mining claims would require resources they didn't have, expertise they would need to acquire, and decisions about responsible development that honored both their needs and Carter's expressed wishes. "I think we need legal advice," Rachel concluded as they neared the cabin. "Someone who understands mining law and can help us navigate the complexities." The sight that greeted them brought the conversation to an abrupt halt. A black SUV with tinted windows was parked in front of the cabin, and a man in an expensive suit stood on the porch, examining the repairs they had made with a critical eye. With a jolt, Rachel recognized him, the wealthy man who had scoffed at her 50-cent bid at the auction. Mia moved closer to her, suddenly shy. "Who's that? What does he want?" Rachel squared her shoulders, conscious of the rock samples in her backpack and the map hidden safely inside the cabin. The man represented the exact kind of interest Carter had sought to avoid. Corporate, calculating, focused on extraction without regard for the consequences. "I don't know," she whispered, adjusting Lily's weight against her chest. "But we're about to find out." As they approached, the man turned, his expression shifting from critical assessment to a practiced charm. His smile never reached his eyes, which remained cold and appraising as he extended a hand. "Mrs. Morgan, what a surprise to find you've actually made this place habitable. I'm Edward Prescott, from the Heritage Mining Corporation. I believe we met briefly at the auction." Rachel kept her composure, though her mind was racing with questions. The name Prescott was tied to Heritage Mining, one of the largest mining companies in the region, known for aggressive extraction practices and minimal environmental regard. "Mr. Prescott, what brings you all the way up our mountain road?" His smile widened, revealing a set of perfect teeth. "Just checking on potential investment opportunities in the area. My company has a historical interest in these mountains." dating back to my grandfather's time. We're considering reactivating some of those interests, which may affect neighboring properties. His gaze swept over the cabin, the newly reinforced porch, and the garden they had so painstakingly created. You've put considerable work into this place. Admirable, though perhaps misguided. This region has significant mineral potential that a small residential holding can't properly develop. The implication was clear. Their presence was an inconvenience to corporate interests. Her 50-cent cabin was an obstacle to extraction plans. Rachel thought of Carter's journals, his detailed documentation of silver deposits, and his ethical concerns about corporate development. The parallels were too precise to be a coincidence. We're quite happy with our home as it is, Mr. Prescott. Not all value can be measured in mineral rights or corporate profits. He handed her a business card, the expensive paper stock feeling incongruous in her work-calloused hands. Something to consider as winter approaches. These mountains can be unforgiving to the unprepared, especially for a single mother with such young children. I understand the authorities don't look kindly on homes without proper utilities when small children are involved. The implied threat hung in the air as he turned back to his vehicle. The powerful engine disturbed the mountain silence as he drove away, leaving Rachel with Margaret and the girls on the porch, the business card burning in her palm like something poisonous. That man is as subtle as a rock slide, Margaret murmured, gently rocking Lily to soothe the baby, who had grown fussy during the tense conversation. The Prescotts have been trying to control these mountains for 3 generations. Rachel watched until the SUV disappeared around a bend, her mind connecting the pieces of a puzzle that suddenly felt much larger and more complex. He knows about the silver, doesn't he? He must suspect Carter found something valuable. More than suspect, I'd bet. His grandfather was Richard Prescott, who ran the mining company that competed with Carter's family business back in the 60s. There's a history here, a feud that was never settled. Inside the cabin, Rachel retrieved Carter's documents from their hiding place beneath the loose floorboard in the bedroom. With Margaret, they spread the maps across the table, examining them with new understanding. Several of the deposits Carter had documented most extensively were in areas that would have been held by the original Taylor Mining Company. If Heritage Mining had acquired those historical interests, it might have a legitimate legal basis to claim mineral rights throughout the region, except where valid competing claims existed. Carter's unfiled documentation represented exactly that possibility. Competing claims based on his detailed geological work. Claims that Rachel might now be in a position to file, if she could navigate the legal and financial requirements. Edward Prescott's visit transformed their discovery from an interesting historical find into an urgent strategic consideration. Corporate interests were actively pursuing the same resources Carter had documented and chosen to protect. The 50-cent cabin had placed Rachel and her daughters directly in the path of powerful economic forces. Mia traced one of Carter's maps with her finger, her expression thoughtful beyond her years. The bad man wants our treasure, doesn't he? The shiny rocks. Rachel opened her journal, making notes with a renewed sense of purpose. The cryptic message they had found weeks earlier suddenly took on new meaning. The treasure is not under the earth, but within it. Not a philosophical reflection, but a literal description of the silver deposits waiting to be claimed by those who understood their value and their responsibility. Visit from Edward Prescott, Heritage Mining, she wrote. Clearly interested in mineral rights throughout the region. Potential connection to the original Taylor Mining Company. Carter's documentation now appears strategically significant, not just historical. Next steps. 1. Consult an attorney specializing in mining law. 2. Assess financial requirements for filing claims. 3. Determine the environmental impact of responsible development. Consider Carter's ethical framework as a guideline for decisions. Margaret helped Rachel put the girls to bed, then prepared to leave. At the door, she paused. You need to be careful, Rachel. The Prescotts aren't known for being subtle or fair when they want something. My sister is married to an environmental lawyer, Samantha Liu. She might be able to help you understand what you're up against. The next day, Rachel noticed a vehicle parked where the main road met their dirt track, a black SUV identical to Prescott's. As they drove past on their way to town, the driver made no attempt to hide his surveillance, deliberately raising a camera with a long-range lens. Mia waved innocently from her car seat, unaware of the implications. They're watching us now, Rachel observed, her knuckles white on the steering wheel. The implicit threat was clear. Their movements were being monitored. Their interest in Carter's legacy had been noted. The corporate pressure had begun before they had even taken any concrete action. Back at the cabin, Rachel carefully hid Carter's documentation again. The most valuable papers, the trust deed and unfiled mining certificates, were placed in a waterproof container and buried beneath the woodpile. Carter had understood the value of concealing important information. They would follow his lead. That night, Rachel made a decision that would shape everything to come. We're going to file a claim on the Willow Creek site. Just one to establish a legal position. If Carter's documentation is as valuable as I believe, we can use that single claim to protect the larger territory. It was a claim they could just afford if they drained their meager savings and stretched their resources to the limit. A gambit to test the legal waters and determine if Carter's unregistered certificates could be converted into valid modern rights. The path forward required careful planning. Margaret's sister, Samantha Liu, agreed to help prepare the application, working for a reduced fee with the understanding that successful claims could lead to more substantial compensation later. She drove up to the cabin to inspect Carter's documentation with growing excitement. "This is extraordinary work," she said, "far beyond what most professional surveyors produce even today. The level of detail in his geological assessments would cost tens of thousands to replicate. What you've found could save you enormous expense if you decide to pursue mining claims." The technical explanation that followed tested the limits of Rachel's understanding. Modern mining claims required precise documentation of mineral deposits, environmental impact studies, filing fees, and ongoing maintenance to remain valid. Carter's work provided the geological foundation, but they would still need to navigate complex regulatory requirements and substantial costs. The filing fees alone would be around $500 per claim, Samantha explained, tracing one of the locations on Carter's map. Then there are the costs of survey verification, environmental assessments, and legal expenses. We're talking at least $10,000 to properly establish a single claim. It was a mountain of money they did not have. Rachel's stomach tightened as she calculated their current resources. It was barely enough for winter provisions, let alone speculative mining claims. "But there's something else you should consider," Samantha continued, turning to a different section of Carter's materials. "These maps and assay reports aren't just scientifically valuable. They're historically significant. Carter was documenting these deposits at the exact time the original Taylor Mining Company was collapsing. There may be complicated ownership issues here that could work in your favor." Samantha's suggestion to start with a historical search led them to the county archives, housed in the basement of the Helena courthouse. There, among dusty ledgers and faded property records, the pieces of William Carter's story began to fall into place, and the picture was far more complex than they had imagined. Carter wasn't just a solitary prospector documenting silver deposits. He was the heir to the Carter Family Mining Consortium, a significant operation with holdings throughout the region. Property records showed the consortium had been in fierce competition with the Taylor Mining Company throughout the 50s and early 60s, with both entities claiming mineral rights over overlapping territories. Most stunning of all was a trust deed dated 1965, the same year Carter bought the cabin. The document named William Carter as the sole heir and beneficiary of all mineral rights, properties, and business interests formerly held by the Carter Family Mining Consortium. Rachel stared at the faded document, trying to process its implications. Carter hadn't been running from failure. He had been preparing for a fight. He was running from his birthright. He had walked away from a family mining empire, choosing isolation over exploitation. But why? The answer emerged from the archived correspondence, filed alongside the property deeds. Letters between William and his brother, Richard Carter, revealed a widening schism over the direction of the family business. William had opposed partnerships with large mining firms, advocating for sustainable practices and community benefits. Richard pushed for expansion and profit maximization, ultimately aligning with the Northwest Mining Corporation, the same company mentioned in Carter's journals, the one that had sought him out about his silver research. The final notice in the files, dated December 1968, delivered the most shocking revelation. Your continued absence from the necessary proceedings regarding the estate will result in the forfeiture of inheritance rights. The legal presumption of abandonment will take effect on January 1, 1969, unless you appear before the probate court to contest this action. Carter had chosen to renounce his inheritance rather than participate in mining operations he considered environmentally destructive. He had abandoned millions in family wealth, but preserved the knowledge of valuable mineral locations, knowledge he hoped would eventually reach someone who would use it responsibly. Samantha Lowe's expression grew grim as they pieced together the historical narrative. Suddenly, the present situation made a chilling kind of sense. Heritage Mining, Edward Prescott's company, had acquired the remnants of both Taylor Mining and Northwest Mining through a series of corporate mergers in the 1990s. They had likely been searching for Carter's documentation for decades, knowing he had mapped deposits their predecessors couldn't locate. The drive back to the cabin felt charged with new meaning. What had begun as a 50-cent gamble for a roof over their heads had evolved into something far more complex. They had stumbled into a decades-old conflict between corporate mining interests and one man's environmental principles. As they neared the turnoff for their property, Rachel spotted a vehicle parked where the main road met their dirt track, a black SUV identical to Prescott's. As they passed, the driver made no attempt to hide his surveillance, deliberately raising a camera with a long-range lens. Not even pretending to be subtle, Samantha observed, her legal mind already calculating how to document this harassment. Rachel kept her expression neutral until they were well down the road, her knuckles white on the steering wheel. The implied threat was clear. Their movements were being monitored, their interest in Carter's legacy noted. The corporate pressure had begun before they had even taken any concrete action. Back at the cabin, they carefully hid Carter's documentation beneath a loose floorboard in the bedroom. The most valuable documents were placed in a waterproof container and buried under the woodpile. Carter had understood the value of hiding important information. They would follow his lead. That night, Long after the girls were asleep, Rachel and Samantha discussed strategy by lantern light at the kitchen table. Filing a claim on Willow Creek would establish a legal foothold, but it would also alert Heritage Mining to the extent of their knowledge. It would transform their quiet existence into a direct opposition to corporate interests. "You need to understand what you're getting into," Samantha warned her. "Heritage Mining has resources you can't imagine. Legal teams, political connections, ways of applying pressure that never quite cross the line into illegality. Are you prepared for that kind of fight?" Rachel glanced toward the bedroom where her daughters slept. "What choice do I have? This cabin is everything we have. If Prescott wants us gone, he'll find a way to make it happen unless we get some legal protection. Carter's documentation is our only leverage." 2 weeks later, Rachel returned from gathering firewood to find fresh tire tracks leading up to the cabin. Nothing inside seemed disturbed, but the feeling of violation lingered. Someone had been there, scoping out the property, perhaps looking for the very documents they had so carefully hidden. The next day brought more direct intimidation. A county vehicle arrived unannounced, and an official in a crisp uniform informed them that an anonymous complaint had triggered mandatory environmental and safety inspections of their property. The inspection found nothing actionable. Rachel's scientific background had ensured her water purification system and waste management practices exceeded requirements. But the message was clear. Your actions are being watched, and administrative harassment can be deployed at will. These corporate pressure tactics might have worked against isolated individuals, but Rachel and her daughters were no longer alone. Margaret Taylor arrived the next morning with news that was spreading like wildfire through the community. Heritage Mining had filed preliminary paperwork for large-scale mining operations across the region, including areas near the watershed sources for several communities. Suddenly, Rachel's potential claim represented more than her personal interest. It had become a potential legal roadblock to corporate extraction plans that threatened the local water supply. Her 50-cent cabin had placed them at the center of a conflict much bigger than themselves. Samantha's warning came through Margaret's secure channel. "They're building a case for a custody intervention. They'll argue that the cabin's lack of modern utilities constitutes neglect, especially during the winter months. We need to document how you're meeting the girls' educational and developmental needs." Despite the unconventional environment, the threat to her family bond transformed the abstract corporate pressure into a deeply personal violation. Rachel channeled her fear into the systematic documentation of Mia's homeschooling progress, her adaptation to mountain life, and the supportive community connections they had built. Margaret provided a sworn statement about the girls' evident health and happiness. Jim Cooper documented Mia's growing proficiency in practical skills that many adults lacked. Most importantly, Rachel began keeping a detailed journal of her daughter's development, creating contemporaneous evidence that would directly contradict any corporate narrative of neglect or deprivation. 20 days into the process of preparing the mining claim, Rachel received a call from Daniel Williams. Her ex-husband's voice carried an unfamiliar tone of concern mixed with opportunism. "I was contacted by someone from a mining company. They mentioned you're living in some kind of shack with no running water or electricity. Is that true, Rachel?" He paused. "With our girls?" His rehearsed indignation barely concealed the real message. Someone had reached out to him, offering something of value in exchange for his cooperation. "Our home is perfectly safe and adequate, Daniel. The girls are thriving. When was the last time you even asked about them?" 6 weeks ago. 7. A pause crackled on the line. I'm filing for an emergency reconsideration of custody. My lawyer says I have grounds based on inadequate living conditions. This isn't about money. It's about what's best for Lily and Mia." The line went dead, leaving Rachel trembling with a mixture of rage and fear. The threat of a custody challenge was the most insidious form of corporate pressure imaginable, using her greatest vulnerability, her love for her daughters, as leverage to force her hand. Samantha confirmed Rachel's suspicions when she reviewed the custody filing. This has corporate intervention written all over it. The language about inadequate utilities and exposure to environmental extremes is boilerplate from similar cases where resource companies have used family courts to remove obstacles, and the timing is too perfect. Daniel suddenly cares about living conditions right when Heritage files its preliminary paperwork. Reinforcing the coordination, Rachel discovered Daniel's lawyer was from the same prestigious firm that represented Heritage Mining on regulatory matters. An unlikely coincidence, one that Samantha carefully documented for potential ethical violations. The custody hearing was scheduled with unusual speed, another sign of influence behind the scenes. With less than a week to prepare, Rachel dedicated herself to documenting every aspect of their mountain life that contributed to the girls' well-being. Photos of their healthy meals, Mia's schoolwork progress, the safety measures in the cabin, and the community support network they had built. Rachel spent sleepless nights preparing, often sitting at the table before dawn, writing by lantern light, compiling proof that her unconventional choices were beneficial, not harmful. During one of these early morning vigils, Mia padded out of the bedroom in fluffy slippers, rubbing the sleep from her eyes. "Why are you always writing, Mommy?" Rachel pulled her daughter onto her lap, breathing in the sweet scent of her hair. "I'm telling our story, sweetie, about how we found this special place and made it our home." Mia's small fingers traced the edge of Rachel's journal. "Is it because of the mean man? The one who wants our shiny rocks?" Children absorb everything, understanding more than adults often imagine. "Partly, yes. Some people think we shouldn't live here, that it's not a good place for you and Lily. I'm writing to show them how wrong they are." Mia's expression turned serious. Her 3-year-old face suddenly aged with understanding. "But we're happy here. This is our home." The simple truth, spoken with absolute conviction, was perhaps the most powerful testimony Rachel could offer. The morning of the custody hearing arrived with a crystalline October chill. Rachel dressed the girls in their best clothes, packed a bag with snacks and toys, and drove the familiar route into town, her heart pounding with every mile. They had survived so much: divorce, near bankruptcy, rebuilding a life from scratch with nothing but a 50-cent cabin, only to face the possibility of losing each other to someone else's greed. When they arrived at the county courthouse, Rachel was stunned to find the parking lot filled with trucks and cars she recognized from Pineville. Jim Cooper stood at the entrance along with Margaret, the librarian, the owner of the small cafe where Rachel sometimes worked, and at least 20 other members of the community. "What are you all doing here?" Rachel asked, her voice thick with emotion. "Showing the judge who your real community is," Jim replied, adjusting his worn cap. "Figured it might help to have some faces to go with all those statements we wrote." Inside, the support continued. Daniel had arrived with his lawyer, a woman in an expensive suit and a severe expression, only to be met with a cool reception from court staff. His attempts to secure a last-minute coffee were stymied by technical problems at the cafeteria. His cell phone mysteriously lost its signal inside the building, while everyone else's worked fine. Small-town justice, it turned out, had its own invisible but powerful mechanisms. The collective response of a community and that valued relationship over corporate influence. The hearing itself revealed how badly Heritage had overplayed its hand. Rachel presented comprehensive documentation of her daughter's educational progress, physical health, and emotional well-being. Community members testified to their evident happiness and development. Most decisively, the social services representative, who had conducted the wellness check, testified that while the living situation was unconventional, it showed no signs of neglect or danger. In fact, the representative noted, Rachel's innovative solutions for water purification and solar heating demonstrated exceptional resourcefulness and attention to safety. The family court judge was unimpressed by Daniel's sudden concern after months of minimal contact. His direct questions exposed the externally motivated nature of the proceedings. Who provided the legal resources for this emergency petition? What specific evidence of danger prompted this sudden action? Why are you represented by a corporate law firm specializing in natural resource litigation instead of family law? The petition was dismissed with prejudice, with the judge noting that any future petitions would require a substantial change in circumstances and evidence of actual, rather than hypothetical, concerns. This decisive defeat of one facet of Heritage's pressure campaign energized the community coalition and hardened Rachel's resolve. The corporation had revealed its willingness to attack her family bonds, confirming every ethical concern Carter had expressed in his journals. With the custody threat neutralized, Rachel and Samantha refocused on the mining claim itself. Heritage's formal challenge required a detailed response linking Carter's historical documentation to current legal standards. The coalition's resources made it possible to hire expert witnesses and technical analyses that would have otherwise been out of their reach. 28 days into their preparations, with the response to Heritage's challenge nearly complete, Mia made a discovery that would completely transform their legal standing. While playing a game of treasure hunt in the woods near the cabin, she found what looked like a small door set into the hillside, concealed by decades of forest growth. "Mommy, I found a secret fairy house," she shouted with excitement, her small hands already working to clear away the fallen leaves. What Mia had uncovered was a carefully constructed observation post, one that overlooked the main approach to the cabin. Inside the small shelter, Rachel found a waterproof container wedged in a crevice between the rocks, containing an old video camera and several sealed tapes. Rachel's hands trembled as she connected the camera to the small generator they used for essential power. The screen flickered to life, revealing William Carter himself, seated in what was unmistakably the cabin's main room, though he appeared decades younger and better preserved. "If you're watching this, it means you've found my documentation and decided to pursue the mining claims I never had the courage to file. I hope you understand what you're getting into, because the people who want to control those mineral rights won't give up easily." The video continued for nearly an hour. Carter methodically explained his geological work, his family's history, and his decision to renounce his inheritance rights rather than participate in environmentally destructive mining operations. He provided detailed testimony about specific sites and considerations for quality and extraction that would meet modern environmental standards. Most importantly, he directly addressed the legal issues. "These claims I am documenting are legitimate and legal. I hold surveying credentials from the Colorado School of Mines, and my geological assessments have been verified by 3 independent labs. More importantly, I have designed mining plans that would extract valuable minerals while preserving the landscape for future generations." The video ended with Carter's direct statement of intent. I am preserving this information, rather than filing the claims myself, because I've seen what happens when mining companies prioritize profit over community well-being. The damage they do lasts for generations, long after the valuable minerals are extracted and shipped far away. I trust that whoever finds my work will understand that mineral wealth should serve local communities, not distant shareholders. Samantha Lou's reaction to the video evidence was immediate and decisive. This changes everything. Carter created a contemporary testimony, specifically to support future claims based on his work. It establishes his competence, validates his geological documentation, and provides clear proof of his intentions. We need to file this as supplemental evidence immediately. The timing proved critical. Heritage Mining had filed additional last-minute challenges, introducing complex legal theories about succession rights in inherited corporate interests. Carter's video testimony directly addressed these claims, explaining precisely why he had chosen to renounce his inheritance rather than allow his family's mining interests to be absorbed by larger corporations. When the preparation was complete, both sides braced for the court hearing that would determine the validity of mining claim number 224136. Heritage Mining had assembled an impressive legal team, 6 lawyers specializing in different aspects of mining law, corporate succession, and property rights. Their strategy was to overwhelm the opposition with procedural complexity and technical challenges. Rachel's coalition countered with targeted expertise. Samantha Lou led the legal representation, supported by specialists in environmental law and historical mining claims. The community fund provided resources for expert witnesses who could validate Carter's geological work against modern standards. The courtroom itself reflected the community dimensions of the conflict. Local residents filled the public seats, their presence a silent declaration of support for the principles Carter had preserved and Rachel now championed. The heritage representatives sat isolated in their expensive suits, their corporate authority carrying little weight in this mountain courthouse, where relationships still mattered more than financial power. Judge Margaret Stone was known for her careful attention to legal detail and her impatience with corporate intimidation tactics. Her preliminary questions suggested she understood the case's broader implications, beyond the specific mining claim in question. Mr. Williams, she addressed Heritage's lead counsel, your client claims superior rights to the mineral deposits based on partnership agreements with Richard Carter. Please explain how those agreements remain valid after Mr. Carter's death in 1970 and the subsequent dissolution of the family's mining consortium. The corporate lawyer's response was technically proficient, but legally unconvincing. Heritage's claims hinged on a series of contractual amendments and succession agreements that were never properly executed or registered, documents that existed in corporate archives but lacked official validation. Your Honor, Samantha countered, we have video testimony from William Carter himself, explaining why he renounced his inheritance rights and what he intended for his geological work. His documented intention was to preserve these mineral deposits for community development, not corporate exploitation. Carter's video was played on a large screen that dominated the courtroom. His voice carried an authority and authenticity that no corporate legal maneuvering could counter. It was the prospector himself, speaking from his personal knowledge of the mineral deposits he had spent decades documenting. The geological evidence is overwhelming, Carter said in the recording. These silver deposits are real, substantial, and accessible, but they must be developed by people who understand that the earth itself is more valuable than anything you can pull from it. Judge Stone's questions after the video focused on technical details of mining law and environmental requirements, but her tone suggested she was impressed by the meticulousness of Carter's work and the legitimacy of Rachel's claim to continue it. Judge Stone addressed Rachel directly. Do you understand that approving your mining claim will set a precedent for community-based mineral development throughout this region? Rachel squared her shoulders, feeling the weight of the moment. Yes, yes, Your Honor. That is exactly what William Carter intended, and it's what our community supports. We are prepared to meet all environmental requirements and community impact standards. We have already prepared detailed environmental plans that exceeds current legal requirements. Our goal is to prove that mineral extraction can enhance, rather than harm, local communities. The judge's decision was swift and decisive. The court finds that William Carter's documentation provides a legitimate basis for new mining claims, that his video testimony establishes a clear intent for community development, and that Heritage Mining Corporation has failed to prove superior rights to the disputed mineral deposits. Mining claim number 224136 is hereby approved and registered. The courtroom erupted in applause from the community supporters, while the company lawyers huddled to plan their inevitable appeals. But Judge Stone's decision set a legal precedent that would be difficult to overturn. Community claims, based on legitimate geological work, would now receive the same consideration as corporate development proposals. We won, Mia whispered, her expression a mix of astonishment and relief as Rachel hugged her. Rachel squeezed her daughter's hand, aware that their victory went far beyond personal gain. Carter won. We just had the courage to finish what he started. As they left the courthouse, surrounded by celebrating supporters, Rachel glanced back to see the Heritage Mining legal team packing their expensive briefcases with tense efficiency. The corporate machine had encountered something its resources couldn't simply overpower: a community united around principles that valued long-term relationships over short-term profits. Her 50-cent cabin had become the unexpected fulcrum for a shift in the power dynamic, one that would reshape mineral development across the entire region. What had begun as a desperate shelter had evolved into a platform for demonstrating that another approach was possible, one that balanced extraction with protection, profit with preservation. Carter's video testimony provided more than legal justification. It gave them his personal blessing to continue his work, transforming their accidental discovery into a purposeful inheritance. His final recorded words would stay with them as they moved forward. Take care of these mountains, and they will take care of you. That's the only wealth that truly matters. That night, back in the cabin they had fought so hard to defend, Rachel put her daughters to bed with a new sense of security. Lily, oblivious to the day's significance, fell asleep quickly, her small face peaceful in the lantern light. Mia, however, understood the shift in their circumstances. The bad men can't take our house now, right? Rachel smoothed her daughter's hair, thinking of how to explain complex legal realities to a 3-year-old. They will try other ways, but we are much safer now, and we are not alone anymore. Mia nodded solemnly, processing this information with the particular gravity only small children can muster. Mr. Carter is helping us, isn't he? Even though he's not here anymore? Yes, sweetie. Mr. Carter left us a gift, and now it's our job to use it wisely. After the girls were asleep, Rachel sat on the porch in the crisp autumn air, watching the stars emerge above the ridgeline. The legal victory had established their right to stay, but it also committed them to a path Carter had only theorized, proving that mining could be conducted in harmony with environmental protection and community benefit. The next phase would demand different skills, different resources, different alliances. But that night, she allowed herself to simply exist in the moment of triumph, to feel the validation of choices made in desperation, but defended with principle. The mountains stood silent around her, a witness to a cycle of conflict and resolution that stretched back for generations. The 50 cents that had seemed such a desperate investment had bought not just a property, but a perspective. The recognition that true value often hides beneath a surface appraisal, waiting to be discovered by those willing to look deeper. Carter had understood that as he mapped silver deposits others overlooked, Rachel had embraced it when she bid on a cabin others dismissed. This shared vision formed the foundation of their approach to both mineral extraction and community development, looking past immediate, surface value to deeper possibilities that demand commitment, knowledge, and an ethical framework. The silver beneath these mountains had always been there, waiting not just for discovery, but for responsible stewardship, for an approach that aligned extraction with preservation, immediate benefit with long-term sustainability. That night, Rachel made a single entry in her journal. Today, we didn't just win a court case. We accepted a legacy and all the responsibility that comes with it. 6 months after Judge Stone's landmark decision, Taylor Ridge had transformed almost beyond recognition. The February sun glinted like diamonds off the fresh snow as Rachel Morgan inspected the newly installed solar array on the cabin's south-facing slope. What had once seemed an impossible luxury, reliable electricity, now powered essential appliances and communication gear inside their renovated home. The leaky roof that had nearly broken both her ankle and her spirit that first summer was now properly shingled and insulated against the mountain winters. Sealed windows kept the bitter cold at bay while framing postcard views of the pristine landscape. But the physical improvements paled in comparison to the organizational transformation underway. The Carter Resource Cooperative, formed in the wake of the court victory, had grown from a concept to a functioning entity with remarkable speed. Today would test the fledgling organization as never before. The first large-scale extraction operation at Willow Creek. "Ready, Mama?" Mia appeared in the doorway, bundled in a down coat and snow pants, her cheeks already pink with excitement, before she'd even stepped into the cold. At nearly 4, she had embraced mountain life with the remarkable adaptability of a child, developing a self-reliance that continually surprised visitors from the city. "Almost, sweetie. Just checking to make sure Jim has the equipment set up correctly." Rachel adjusted her clipboard and scanned the landscape one more time. "Can you go ask Margaret if she's ready to watch Lily while we're at the site?" Inside, Lily, now 14 months old, toddled unsteadily across the cabin's refinished wood floor, guided by the careful hands of Margaret Taylor. The older woman had become an essential part of their lives, a surrogate grandmother whose mountain wisdom complemented Rachel's scientific approach. "I've been looking after children since before you were born," Margaret laughed, waving them toward the door. "We'll be just fine here. This little one and I have plans to make huckleberry muffins, don't we?" The drive to Willow Creek took only 20 minutes, now that the access roads had been improved through a cooperative effort. Rachel noticed how Mia's gaze tracked each familiar landmark: the lightning-scarred pine, the massive boulder that marked the final turn, the creek crossing where they'd collected the first water samples. The child's connection to this landscape was profound, formed as much by scientific observation as by imaginative play. At the site, a dozen community members worked with focused precision, setting up specialized equipment designed according to Carter's meticulous notes, but adapted with Rachel's chemical expertise. Unlike conventional mining operations that scarred mountainsides with industrial-scale disruption, their approach targeted specific deposits with minimal surface impact. "The filtration system's giving us trouble," Jim Cooper reported, leading Rachel to where 3 workers were wrestling with a bank of interconnected filters. We followed Carter's designs to the letter, but the water pressure isn't building up as it should. Rachel surveyed the system, her experienced eyes tracing the path of the water flow. This was the most ambitious aspect of their operation, a tiered filtration process designed not only to prevent contamination, but to actively improve the quality of the downstream water by removing historical pollutants. Carter's design assumes summer water temperatures, Rachel noted, inspecting a pressure gauge. The creek is colder now, which changes the fluid dynamics. We need to recalibrate the intake valves and add heating elements to these sections. The technical modification took 2 hours, with Mia helping to organize tools and peppering them with endless questions about water chemistry. When they finally activated the system, a stream of clear water began to flow through the sequence of filters, each one stripping away progressively finer contaminants before the water was returned to the creek, its minerals and chemistry carefully balanced to match the natural conditions. "Look at this clarity reading," Rachel said, holding a water sample against her test chart. "Better than the baseline. We're actually removing sediment and trace metals from the legacy mining upstream." A spontaneous cheer erupted from the workers. This wasn't just a successful extraction operation. It was the proof of concept for everything Carter had envisioned decades before. Resource development that enhanced, rather than degraded, the environment. By late afternoon, they had processed the first batch of silver-bearing ore, yielding a modest but significant return that would fund further operations and community initiatives. The real victory, however, lay in the water quality measurements taken downstream. It was confirmation that their approach worked not just in theory, but in practice. As they walked back to the cabin, Mia clutched a small vial containing the first refined silver, carefully labeled with the date and coordinates. "Are we rich now, Mama?" she asked, turning the vial to catch the fading light. Rachel paused, considering how to explain the complex reality to a 4-year-old. "Not in the way some people think of being rich. We have enough now for food and clothes and to fix up our home. But what we're really doing is showing people a different way to find silver, a way that doesn't hurt the mountains." "Like Mr. Carter wanted," Mia nodded, her expression serious beyond her years. "Exactly like Mr. Carter wanted." The following weeks unfolded in a flurry of activity as the cooperative established its operational protocols and governance structures. Every Thursday evening, committee meetings took over the renovated Grand Hall in Pineville, once a simple community gathering space, now the headquarters for their ambitious project. Rachel quickly found that managing the co-op's scientific operations while raising 2 young children demanded organizational skills far beyond anything her teaching career had required. She came to rely heavily on the community's childcare rotation, where member families took turns looking after the children during meetings and work shifts. The silver concentration in Section C exceeded projections by 15%, Jim Cooper reported during the March operational meeting. But more importantly, the downstream water quality readings continue to show improvement. The modified filtration system is capturing historical mining contaminants even more effectively than we'd hoped. Rachel added her own findings. The site rehabilitation is also progressing ahead of schedule. We're already seeing native vegetation returning to areas we disturbed during the initial setup, thanks in part to the soil amendments we're applying during reclamation. The cooperative had established strict criteria for sustainable extraction: minimal surface disturbance, comprehensive site restoration, and, most critically, a measurable improvement in environmental metrics after operations were complete. These standards were derived directly from Carter's journals, but incorporated modern scientific methodologies and Rachel's own expertise in chemistry. Their success attracted attention from unexpected quarters. Environmental researchers from state universities requested permission to set up monitoring stations, comparing the water quality above and below their operation. Economic development officials inquired about their employment practices after noticing the co-op hired more local workers at better wages than conventional mining operations. Most significant, however, was the transformation within the community itself. Pineville had been in decline for decades as young people left for opportunities in the cities and traditional industries dwindled. Now, a renewed optimism energized community planning. The co-op's profit-sharing model meant that revenue from the extraction circulated through the local economy instead of flowing to distant corporate headquarters. "Do we need to discuss expansion?" Samantha Liu suggested during the April strategic planning meeting. Carter's documentation identifies at least 3 additional viable sites, each with unique characteristics and potential yields. The discussion that followed revealed the cooperative's evolving philosophy. Unlike corporate operations driven primarily by profit maximization, their deliberations balanced economic considerations with environmental impact, community benefit, and long-term sustainability. Site 2 has the highest silver concentration, Jim pointed out, but it's closer to the main headwaters of the watershed. Any contamination there would have a much wider impact. Site 3 has a lower concentration, but significantly less environmental sensitivity, Rachel countered, highlighting sections of the environmental impact studies. The surrounding geology provides natural containment, and our water enhancement system would actually benefit a creek that is currently suffering from historical contamination. The unanimous decision to prioritize Site 3 over potentially more lucrative alternatives reflected their commitment to Carter's vision. Responsible stewardship, harvesting only what could be taken without damaging the whole, and sustaining both the natural environment and the human community. While Rachel focused on operational decisions, Lily and Mia were developing their own relationships with the mountain community. Lily's first steps were taken on the cabin floor, once hidden under decades of dust. Her first words were shaped by the rhythms of rural life rather than suburban isolation. Mia developed a remarkable environmental awareness, distinguishing native plants from invasive ones and grasping the dynamics of watersheds in a way that astonished adult observers. One evening in early May, as Rachel helped Mia identify wildflower specimens for her nature journal, a black SUV with tinted windows pulled up in front of the cabin. The vehicle's immaculate finish was a stark contrast to the mud-splattered trucks usually seen on the mountain roads. "Mr. Prescott is here," Mia announced, her expression darkening as she recognized the executive from Heritage Mining. Despite her young age, she retained vivid memories of the custody battle and the corporate intimidation tactics that had threatened her family. Edward Prescott emerged, looking visibly uncomfortable in the rural setting. His tailored suit and polished shoes seemed absurdly formal against the backdrop of their homestead, with its garden beds and solar panels. "Morgan," he began, his tone attempting a cordial professionalism. "I was hoping we could discuss recent developments in a civilized manner." Rachel invited him in with wary politeness. Despite their antagonistic history, she maintained a professional respect for an adversary whose actions had ultimately strengthened her community's resolve. The transformed interior clearly surprised him. What had once been a dusty, abandoned shelter now featured comfortable furniture, modern appliances powered by renewable energy, and walls adorned with children's drawings, alongside framed survey maps from Carter's collection. "Your operation at Willow Creek has drawn considerable attention," Prescott stated, declining her offer of tea. "Several environmental organizations are citing your filtration system as a new standard for responsible extraction." Even our board of directors has taken notice. Rachel waited, sensing the true purpose of his visit had yet to be revealed. Heritage Mining is prepared to offer you a position as a sustainability consultant, he finally said. $200,000 a year, plus relocation to Denver and comprehensive benefits, including a college fund for your daughters. The proposal hung in the air between them. It wasn't just a job, it was a complete change of life. A return to urban conveniences, financial security, prestigious professional recognition, everything she might have wanted before discovering Carter's legacy. And the cooperative? Rachel asked, though she already knew the answer. You would retain your legal stake, of course, but without your specific expertise, they would likely struggle to implement the project. Heritage would eventually acquire their operations through normal market mechanisms. The corporate strategy was laid bare. Unable to defeat the community model directly, they sought to remove its key knowledge holder, allowing it to gradually collapse before they absorbed its assets. Mr. Prescott, I appreciate the implied recognition in your offer, Rachel replied carefully. But my work here isn't just professional. It's a personal commitment to values I share with this community. I am not interested in helping Heritage Mining adopt a superficial gloss of sustainability while its extractive foundations remain unchanged.